The man known to history as George Washington was born on the 22nd of February 1732 at his father's plantation of Pope's Creek in Westmoreland County in the colony of Virginia, one of the 13 British colonies in North America. His father was Augustine Washington, a member of Virginia's landed gentry and a successful businessman who owned several tobacco plantations as well as iron operations in Virginia and neighboring Maryland, in partnership with the English Principio Company. He was also active in the local militia and was a justice of the peace and sheriff for Westmoreland County. Augustine had married his first wife, Jane Butler, in 1715, who bore him 4 children before her death in 1729. A couple of years later, in 1731, he would marry the 23-year-old Mary Johnson Ball, who would give him a further 6 children, of whom George was the eldest. Mary Washington was born in 1708 to an elderly father who died 3 years later, leaving her 400 acres of land, while her mother died when she was 12. The orphaned Mary was left in the care of family friend George Eskridge, who was probably responsible for introducing her to Augustine Washington. Thus, when Mary gave birth to her first son, she named him George. Brought up as a loyal subject of the British Empire, as a child, George Washington could never imagine that one day he would be responsible for leading the successful military rebellion to break free from Britain and establish the United States of America. He grew up in eastern Virginia amidst a vast expanse of farmland with plantation houses and small towns dotted across the landscape. Within the British social hierarchy, the Washingtons were considered commoners, far removed from the regal splendor of the court of King George II. Nevertheless, within the American colonies, the Washingtons were by no means poor, and with over 10,000 acres of plantation land, together with his other commercial interests, Augustine Washington was certainly a member of the local elite. His wealth and prosperity depended in part on slave labor, allowing plantation owners a lot of free time, which was typically filled with fox hunts, horse races, and other entertainments. Augustine Washington's tendency to move around his properties to better manage his business interests meant that George had an unsettled childhood. In 1735, the family moved to the 2,500-acre estate of Little Hunting Creek on the banks of the Potomac River, and 3 years later, in 1738, they moved once again to Ferry Farm on the Rappahannock River across from the port of Fredericksburg and a short ride away from the ironworks at Accokeek Creek. From his house, George could see the ships being loaded with tobacco, iron, and other commodities, which would soon fuel the very early stages of the Industrial Revolution, and in return, the colony of Virginia grew steadily richer. One of the most important figures in George's childhood was his half-brother Lawrence. 14 years older than George, Lawrence studied at Appleby Grammar School, where he stayed on as a teacher until the age of 20. It was around this time, when George was 6 years old, that the two brothers first met. He heard stories of Lawrence's service as a captain in a Virginia company in 1739 during the War of Jenkins' Ear against Spain, named after the British naval captain whose ear had been cut off during an altercation with the Spanish several years earlier. Lawrence was part of an expeditionary force led by Admiral Edward Vernon, which attacked the Spanish port of Cartagena in South America. The effort proved a bloody failure as the force was cut down by the enemy and yellow fever. Captain Washington never made it off the ship, blaming General Thomas Wentworth, who treated the American soldiers with disdain and did not even let them leave their ships. In spite of this, Lawrence Washington proudly served the British Army as a commissioned officer and was appointed Adjutant General of Virginia, with responsibility over the organization of the colony's militia companies. When his father transferred him to the management of the estate at Little Hunting Creek, he renamed it Mount Vernon after the admiral. George may have expected to receive the same classical education as his elder half-brothers, but such hopes were extinguished on the 12th of